Our third and last witness is Mel Broughton, spokesperson for Speak, a campaign group which successfully opposed a new primate research centre in Cambridge and now protests against vivisection and those places connected to it, such as the laboratories under construction in Oxford. If Dr. Jerry Vlasak, the controversial American animal rights activist, does gain permission to enter Britain, Mel Broughton will be attending that meeting. Mel Broughton, why do you think you have the moral right to take what might be called direct action against those involved in animal experimentation?
My reason for being part of an active animal rights campaign is to prevent pain and suffering to what I consider to be sentient beings, and it's that simple.
Right. Claire Fox?
Mr. Broughton, many people involved in animal rights activities compare the treatment of animals to, for example, the way that blacks were treated in the 19th century and the kind of racism. Is that the kind of approach you might adopt?
My approach is that the struggle for animal liberation, if you want to use that word, it's another part of human evolution in a way. What we're fighting for is to stop the exploitation and suffering of non-human animals. And I do see parallels with other liberation struggles of the past.
In the 19th century, it was often understood that blacks were like apes and monkeys, and that's the way they were treated. Isn't there a problem with that, that was actually a failure to distinguish properly between humans and people, and that you're actually humans and animals, and that you're actually replicating that mistake because you yourself don't seem to be able to tell the difference between a human and an animal?
Well, no, I totally reject that. I mean, I can tell the difference between a human and an animal. But as I said at the start, to me, this is a very, very clear issue here. We're talking about massive suffering.
Okay, so let's just think about pain and suffering. One thing about human beings is that traditionally they have been prepared to accept a certain amount of pain, for example, for a higher cause. They're not just reacting against things. They're not animals because they can make a conscious decision, for example, to accept torture because they believe in something, whereas animals would never do that. Don't you see a distinction, a moral distinction, that we're not just united by pain, because that really just takes away any sense of a higher order of things?
No, again, I think the issue is being clouded here. What I'm saying is very, very clear. Animals are actually totally at the mercy of human beings, absolutely, unequivocally. And they have no defenders other than those people involved in the animal rights movement, or the wider animal rights movement, to actually give them protection. Yes. I think it's very important to understand that.
Okay, so you want to give animals rights because they suffer pain, but in fact we don't give anybody else, any humans haven't got rights because they suffer pain. I mean, you're giving something to someone who can't enact on them, and just on the basis of pain. That's a very reductive view of the way you...
No, again, what we're talking about here is giving them the right to have a life free from having pain inflicted on them by the human species. In other words, these animals, as I've said before, across the board, whether it be in the vivisection laboratory, the factory farms, the slaughterhouses or the hunting field, have no protection whatsoever other than those people who stand up and actually defend or give them rights or fight to give them rights from that kind of exploitation.
Mel Broughton, can I just put one question to you? You believe it's wrong to inflict pain on animals. Do you think it's wrong, therefore, to inflict pain on humans?
Yeah, ultimately I do, yeah.
So therefore you're in favour of non-violence?
Yes, I am in favour of non-violence, but I'm quite clear that direct action, as we talked about earlier, and you've introduced me as being involved in direct action, I'll be quite clear about this. I've served a prison sentence as a member of the animal rights movement, so I have been involved in illegal direct action. And I think historically, direct action has been a part of all the liberation struggles, whether it be the freeing of slaves or the fight for the vote for women. And I don't see the animal liberation movement as being any different. And if you're talking about violence, then I think the important thing to remember is the enormity of the violence that's inflicted on animals.
All right, Clifford Longley.
I'm curious to know how consistent your position is. I mean, there are drugs which are prepared specifically for veterinary purposes, for example. Would you oppose the testing of a drug designed to cure illness among chickens on other chickens? Would that be against your principles?
Yeah, it would, yeah. I mean, I would argue that ultimately animals shouldn't be used in that way for whatever reason. And I think the thing to remember about the question you're putting is that those animals, the drugs that have been developed for those animals, invariably are animals that have been kept in farms, factory farms. In other words, they're animals that are only there or only being bred or produced to either feed people or be used in some other way.
What about pain and suffering in nature? We know very well nature's red in tooth and claw. There are game parks where lions regularly feed on antelopes. Do you think human beings have a duty to go along and police that process and prevent the suffering of antelopes being eaten alive by lions?
No.
How do you justify yourself in not wanting to intervene in that natural process?
I think because the very word you said, it is a natural process in the respect that those animals you're talking about, whether it be lions, tigers, which I assume you're talking about hunting and other animals, have no other way of finding food. That's what they do. Human beings do have other options. We do not have to be involved in the killing of animals or the exploitation of them. And I think the other thing important to remember is when we're talking about the exploitation of animals, whether it be in the vivisection of actual factory farming, we're talking about not just hundreds of animals or thousands, but millions and millions of animals.
Okay.
Not just at the point of suffering at the point of death, but also in the way they're reared and the way they're kept, in their daily lives.
And do we have a right to kill animals if they're a threat to us? I mean, if these animals stop eating antelopes and start eating local villagers, for example, would it be correct to send an armed patrol along to...
Well, I'm sure if I was a villager living somewhere where, a wild animal came running in and attacked me, then the chances are, I would probably kill it in self-defence.
Okay.
Melanie Phillips?
Mr. Broughton, would you ever swat a mosquito?
No, not if I could possibly avoid it. I mean, for the same reason I wouldn't tread on a worm deliberately or...
Right. What do you do about ants?
What do you mean, what do I do about ants?
Well, do you avoid treading on the ground in case you step on an ant?
What I do is I do as much as I possibly can to avoid killing anything. If I see an ant crossing in front of me or a worm or anything else, then I will consciously make a decision to avoid treading on it. Obviously, I drive a car. I'm fully aware that when I pull up at home, there are insects squashed on the windscreen. I find that regrettable, I do. But unfortunately, because of the lifestyle I lead, and the lifestyle we do lead in the society now, it's something that I can't avoid. But I will do as much as I possibly can to make sure I inflict the least amount of suffering possible.
So if you were in a mosquito-ridden room, you would happily expose yourself to these insects and you would do nothing to protect yourself from them?
Yeah, well, I'd leave the room.
Michael Gove?
You say that we human beings have moral choices. We may have in parts of the prosperous West. But what about indigenous peoples who've always hunted for food? Would you prevent, for example, the Bushmen of the Kalahari from pursuing their natural quarry?
No, I mean, that's a very good question. And ultimately, I would hope that human society eventually evolve to a point where that will become a thing of the past. What I would say about indigenous people, though, again, and this is a point worth putting over, is that if you look at Eskimos, for instance, they now use modern hunting equipment. They use fast speed skis, high-powered rifles, and this isn't indigenous hunting anymore. This is, again, using, modern weaponry to kill animals. And I think that, it's very difficult to separate human evolution in terms of the way we exploit animals, and that all people, wherever they are, seem to be prepared to use, the most modern of technology to kill animals, regardless of whether they're indigenous or whether they live in the Western world. Ultimately, I would like to see a world where that kind of killing is no more.
Talking about modern technology and its use in killing, I just wanted to ask you how far your sense of care and compassion towards living things extended. What do you think about abortion? Do you believe that it's right to terminate the lives of fetuses who can feel pain in the womb?
Abortion is something that's difficult. I personally am not opposed to abortion. I take your point about it being being the life. I think that's a perfectly valid question. I'm not an expert on at what point you would say that it becomes a life or not. But I am actually not opposed to abortion.
So
no, but
you're happy to terminate a human life in the womb.
I wouldn't say no. I didn't say I was happy about it.
But you're prepared to do so. But you would spare a worm if you happen to be about to stand on it.
Well, again, what I can only say is that I'm not opposed to abortion, but I can understand the reasoning behind your question. But what I would say is that with human beings, that you make choices about life, and when you're talking about in terms of abortion and people having children, and there is a very difficult moral question there, admittedly. But I don't still see how that equates to someone like myself in my daily life, avoiding causing suffering to other living things. Just because I don't happen to be totally opposed to abortion, although I can see it as a problematic one. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have it.
Claire Fox?
It's interesting kind of morality you've got, because you actually seem very concerned about human beings inflicting suffering on, innocent creatures. That's the way you're posing it. It's a very kind of human-centred kind of morality in a way. What you seem to object to is the kind of idea of a gratuitous, infliction of pain. But can I just put to you that, that you're motivated by human things, and you're just looking at animals through human eyes, because they have no such awareness.
No, absolutely
They are not anticipating anything.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I said right at the beginning that my motivation for being an animal rights activist is defence of what I see. I see animals as very much victims, if you like, if you want to use that word. In other words, they do not have any protection
No, but
at
you've
all,
talked
other
about
than
people
pain who are involved or who carry
I
these sort of ethos
I
of an
understand.
liberation ethic.
I understand that point. And just to say something like pain. I mean, what's as a human being myself, if you can relate to this, one of the things that's most frightening about pain is the anticipation of it, isn't it? It's the kind of the knowledge of it. Now, if somebody's about to behead you, it's like the thought of what might happen to you, or it's the fear of it. It's the self-reflection on it. What animals can't do that, can they? So it's a psychological. There's a deeper point about pain than physical violence. It's actually knowing and understanding it.
I think actually you're wrong. I think increasingly, like non-invasive research in animals, just show that they do have a sense of what is going to happen to them.
So they have a
Certainly some
psychological
animals.
sense.
I think they certainly do have a
Yeah,
psychological
so you
sense.
think they have, but is there any, apart from your concern that they might have, there obviously is no evidence of that, is there? Because we can't communicate with them.
You can't communicate with them that you can ask them a direct question. But as I've said before, there is plenty of evidence from non-invasive research animals, people who study animals in the wild and also in more human environments, have shown that in fact they do have a sense of anticipation, they do have a sense of fear, and that is becoming shown more and more.
Mel Broughton, can I just ask you a final question, which is how far would you take this? You are a vegan, so presumably once you've finished winning the battle, if you do vivisection, you stop anybody eating meat? What's after that?
I don't think you can actually legislate to stop people
but you want
eating
to
meat.
stop it, yes?
I would love to see a world where people didn't eat meat.
At all. And what
At
about
all.
the next thing? Are you saying that in those circumstances, for example, people, if attacked by an animal, shouldn't defend themselves, shouldn't kill that animal, shouldn't commit violence on the animal in any circumstances?
Well, again, I said right at the beginning, I could understand a situation where if I was living somewhere in a village or something and I had no other protection and I was attacked by an animal, the chances are I would defend myself.
Should I defend myself? Should I defend my child in those circumstances and kill an animal and cause the animal pain if the result is the preservation of the life of myself and my child?
In those situations, you would probably be justified in doing it, but that's not what we're talking about here.
It's called medical experimentation.
No, it's not
Mel
called medical
Broughton,
experimentation.
thank you very much indeed.